Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege to be here today, and I'd like to please thank the Agri Eastern Cape for the invitation and for all the support that WRSA receives on numerous platforms throughout the year. So the biggest question that we always ask is game a commodity or not? Now, I'm exceptionally biased, and if you have a look at this slide, obviously game's not included when you Google it. So just a disclaimer for you all. I'm a retired cattle farmer. Well, that's what I consider myself to be. We farmed with 1,000 head of cattle on 1,000 hectares with intensive grazing in the Limpopo. And we farmers, we produce everything that we have got on our property. You can consider that land was it was a derelict potato farm that got converted to livestock and then got converted to game after that. So we're definitely part of the agro-sustainable wildlife economy in terms of we produce what we have. So every wildebeest you see here was bred on that farm and killed on that farm. It's every one of these have been through the cooking pots or been sold to hunters. And that's what we produced as game ranchers. So I've got an exceptionally biased view, and I believe that we are a commodity under agriculture. And I'll give you guys a bit of a rundown where we are and how we get in there and what challenges we have in the industry. There we go. So some key messages I'd like to leave with you all is firstly, the wildlife economy is the renewable and sustainable gold of Africa. It's something that's unique. It's something that we have in South Africa, and it's because of the 1991 Game Theft Act that we can own wildlife and actually farm with it sustainably, which has allowed us to grow this economy. Two, to grow the wildlife economy, we need to outperform other land use options. If I'm going to make more money out of something else, be it maize, be it livestock, do you think I'm going to keep wildlife? Of course not. I'm going to go where the money is because I need to pay school fees and I need to put food on the table. And that's what farming is. And that's where we'll talk about diversification now. And thirdly, the biggest threat to wildlife is when it becomes valueless to rural people. Unfortunately, we've got this Eurocentric view that wildlife we shouldn't touch, we shouldn't trade with, we shouldn't breed with. And that's completely the wrong view, and we need to address it. So as wildlife ranchers, that's my dad there on the tractor. You can hire him if you're in the Limpopo. We say we farm with swag. Almal hier wat met lewende hawe boer. If you farm with livestock, you farm with swag. You farm with soil, water, air, and grass. It just decides on what commodity you're going to use to graze that grass. So there you can see where we've baled grass with the wildebeest in the background in Alma. So the key differences between us as wildlife ranchers and protected areas is firstly, sustainable livelihoods. If we're not sustainable, we're going bankrupt. I don't need laws to tell me how I need to ranch on my own property. Because if I don't do it sustainably, I'm not going to be there in 5 or 10 years. Where a lot of the protected areas models is biodiversity preservation. We need to preserve it. Now, if you ask me what preserve means, there's tansani of your oma wat het in 'n koekieblik sit, of a jar. That's a preserve. And that's not how we must keep our wildlife. We must be able to utilize it and make an income from it. Secondly, the big key difference is that our objective is biodiversity conservation after sustainable livelihoods, whereas the department's one is environmental services. Okay, so who are we as WRSA? We're a national association throughout the country with regional interest groups in each province. I'd like to thank John Herter, who's our provincial chair, who does exceptional work here in the Eastern Cape, and we're based on 5 models. Firstly, we've got the breeding of game. We've got the hunting of game, which is both local and international. We've got products, which includes your taxidermy. We've got, skipped one there, tourism, and then finally mixed farming. And it's the diversification of this that makes game ranching sustainable with all 5. So when we talk about diversifying your portfolio, Gerard Heineke, I'm sure some of you might know him here from the Eastern Cape. He was the one that said, if I stand on one leg, you're going to push me over quite easily. So if I've only got hunting or tourism, you can push me over quite easily. But if I've got diversified across 5 different sectors, so I've got breeding, tourism, mixed products, etc., it's going to be harder to push me over. And that's what's important. And this is just an overview of all the economic drivers that can come out of the wildlife sector where you can make money and where you can expand your business to be different. So as the agro-sustainable sector, if we talk about protected areas, 8% of our country's landmass, that's where they are. And if we look at the agricultural maps, you've got grain, sugar products, forestry, vegetables, fruit, cattle, sheep, diverse, subsistence, none. Where's the game, guys? Where are we farming with wildlife? Are we farming in Lesotho and Kruger? Because those are the only places where there's none. Okay, so we are competing with agriculture, but not competing in terms of fighting, competing in terms of what is going to be the best land use option for the farmer, and that's what he's going to go for. So in terms of agriculture, this is quite a sore topic for me. When the new minister came in, we went and saw him personally, and we said, as the wildlife sector, we would like to be under agriculture. And he promised me by the 1st of April last year, we would be under agriculture. Well, I guess April fool's on me, hey? Because we're still sitting under environment. Okay, and under environment, we've got our own challenges. We've had 4 ministers in the last 2 years. We've got top species regulations and species lists, lion prohibition notices, quotas that are not being issued. And we don't know who's going to be our next minister going forward, the way it's been changed recently. And I'm sad to say, but I did show this exact slide to the former minister, Dr. Dion George, and I showed him how these guys exploit people's emotions to generate income, so much so to the tune of 3.5 billion rand. Now, when he left his position as the minister, he created his own conservation trust in the US, now doing exactly what those animal rights organizations have done. So, in terms of the wildlife sector, we've taken a huge knock through the department and through a minister that was totally captured, in my view, by the animal rights groupings. And it's a big challenge for us to correct. So what's our industry worth? If you come and visit me, I'll show you exactly where that bank is. Okay, 17% of marginal agricultural land has been converted to wildlife because other land use options are not viable. We now have 16 million head of game under private ownership with 20 million head in total. So 80% is under private ownership. In terms of hunting alone, we estimate to generate 44 billion rand annually to the economy, which is a huge economic turnover in terms of value. The Sustainable Wildlife Economies project that was done both here in the Eastern Cape and in Limpopo, and to every single game farmer who participated in it, I'd like to thank you again. This data has been immense in showing what we've achieved as an industry. But what was interesting is from the Eastern Cape survey alone, 57% of the farms that had wildlife had some form of mixed agriculture. And that's what makes us different. We're not just saying farm only with wildlife or farm only with livestock. It's that diversification of your portfolio that makes it successful. This was the Eastern Cape survey, 852,000 hectares. Limpopo, 862,000, so you can basically say 1.7 million hectares was surveyed in this project, which gave us a huge oversight or overview of what's happening in the industry. What was interesting is only 3% of animals on those properties are tops. For those that don't know tops, it's a threatened or protected species. In other words, I need to phone a nature conservation official and get a permit before I can hunt the animal. 62% of the properties said that they have listed large predators. So my question to you here today, name one animal that's been farmed into extinction. Just one. Just one, please. There isn't one. So why do we need all these regulations and legislations that are actually based in protected areas to stop use being enforced on the private sector that's not detrimental to the survival of the species? That's the biggest question I ask on a daily basis. So if we have a look at where we are 95% of the roan antelope in private hands. Sorry, it's 87% of the black wildebeest in private hands. 90% of the blesbuck, 97% of the sable antelope, 65% of the world's white rhino population in private hands in South Africa. That's the contribution that the wildlife sector is making. 88% of the bontebok on privately owned farmland. And I'd like to pause here and again thank the Eastern Cape. Last year I had the privilege of being at CITES Convention, that's the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, where regulations are made at an international level on the trade. We made as WRSA the proposal to delist the bontebok, in other words, remove it. This was our proposal that we made with the support of the Sustainable Use Coalition. This is where we showed the data in terms of the percentage increase that's happened of 65,000% in terms of herd growth, and we had success. The bontebok was delisted, which has already increased its value dramatically and has helped with species conservation. Another big challenge that we're sitting with is buffalo. And I'd like to pause here while we talk briefly about FMD. Ladies and gents, we are all farmers. Let's not crucify each other based on a disease that's out of our own control. Let's work with each other. Let's find solutions and let's communicate with each other. And I'd like to thank AgriSA again for the leadership it's shown in welcoming WRSA to the fore in terms of working together. In terms of the buffalo industry, to give you some overview, our genetics are sound. We compared it to all the reserves in the country. There you can see the first green is Mfolozi, 8,000 buffalo. The second green is Kruger National Park, 30,000 buffalo. If you combine them, you get the line on the right-hand side, which is 38,000 buffalo. There's still 9 game reserves. That's buffalo are more genetically diverse than all of those buffalo combined. So we are ranching and farming sustainably and correct. This is an estimate overview of where the buffalo farms are in the country. Obviously the majority, 50%, is in Limpopo, and 291 were in the Eastern Cape. This is a map showing the buffalo farms in the country. Now, I will put in one disclaimer. I think Eastern Cape's only got 50% of the farms here because of all the name changes. The software struggled to pick up the new locations. So it was something that's been addressed in the software. But unfortunately, our contributions are not being recognized. And I'd like to show you some sable statistics here quickly. According to the IUCN's Red List assessment, there's only 1,346 mature individuals in the country. I'd like to pause on that. 1,346 mature individuals. Does that sound right? No chance. Okay. In 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2021, we sold more than that on auctions alone. Since 2001, we've sold 21,000 sable antelope just on live game auctions. That's not private sales. So in 4 years, on this graph alone, we sold the entire population on auction. But wait, it gets better. This is the international hunting stats, where trophies are exported from the countries. In 2018, 2019, and 2022, we also hunted more than the entire population in the same year. So we sold the entire population on auction, and we hunted the entire population as well. Man, it's amazing that we've still got sable, isn't it? Okay. This is a stat showing the international SCI, Safari Club International. This is their hunting records of trophy entries per year. And you can see the strong green growth that's coming through on South Africa. Countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Tanzania have had a sharp decline because they don't have the same ownership model that we do in South Africa. Okay, but where do we sit at the moment? If we look at the EWT report on provincial reserves, they say that most of them are ineffectively managed with poor capacity, poor management skills, and a lack of budget. When they ask the reserve managers who think that it's well managed, it's unfortunately just the Western Cape that scored above 50%. The rest said that it's poorly managed or I don't have enough information to say. So people that are in charge of managing the very reserves say that they don't have enough information to say. In a lot of sense, with our protected areas, it saddens me to say it, but we're sitting with a failed state. These are the fences of Mapungubwe National Park, completely pushed over by elephants. And I'd like to pause here and ask a question. Are elephants endangered in South Africa? Absolutely not. In actual fact, 75% of all breeding age females outside of Kruger National Park are on some form of contraceptive. 75% of all breeding age females outside of Kruger National Park, in other words, outside the Nun area, are under contraceptives. So the logical question needs to be asked, either a species is endangered and you need to grow it, or it's in abundance and you can utilize it. You can't have something that's endangered and we're giving the thing contraceptives. The logic just defies me at the moment. And this is from an article in 1996. We talk about the first case of state capture. This was when Humane Society gave Bantu Holomisa $2.5 million for the expansion of Addo National Park when this cartoon was drawn up. We've been following the case in Madikwe Game Reserve, for instance, where there's been a huge public outcry. 60,000 hectares, 1,600 elephants. Completely overpopulated. It was blamed on a drought that they were dying, but that picture there is of the Vleisfontein mission, which is in the center of the reserve. Does it look like there's a drought there? That's just fenced off from the elephants, which they can't get to. Okay, so to put everything in perspective, we had a Kenyan visit or delegation come visit us recently to see how the wildlife sector works in South Africa, and they provided me with a document which I then extrapolated. So they sit with their 2021 report, 36,000 elephant, but they're considered endangered. Their recent report of 2025, they're sitting with 42,000 elephant now. Okay. The following species: impala, least concern; hartebeest, least concern; warthog, least concern; waterbuck, least concern. 1,000 waterbuck are least concern. In other words, there's no threat. But 36,000 elephant are under threat. So to give you the new stats where they're sitting in 2025, the impala have decreased to 22,000. The hartebeest have decreased to 3,000. Warthog decreased to 6,600. And the waterbuck to 696. But yet all four are still least concern. What's interesting is that their roan antelope in 2021, only 15 for the entire country. And that's not like South Africa where they exclude us deliberately. That is their genuine stats. There is no private sector like we have. That population has fortunately grown to 21, in other words, one calf per year, but I guess that's progress. And their sable antelope have gone from 51 to 40. That's all that's left in the entire Kenya. But yet we're sitting with this belief that it's just elephants, leopard, rhino, and lions that are important. Here's the shocker. This is our provincial reserves just in Limpopo. That's what's happened with our sable population. Since 2007, we've lost 96.47% of our sable population in provincial reserves. There's only 9 left in Atherston. The other 9 or 7 reserves on this list, sable are extinct. They're no longer there. So that's the type of mismanagement we've seen at provincial level that we need to address. And unfortunately, that's why they now want to put sable antelope on tops. And it's not your friendly grocer. It's your threatened or protected species list. So because the parks are being mismanaged, they want to put our wildlife that we're managing correctly on endangered species lists. That we have to have extra permits to be able to utilize the species because they don't count our animals. The WRSA has challenged tops before, and I'd like to thank Agri Eastern Cape specifically for supporting us when we challenged it the first time, and we'll most likely have to challenge it again when they try and force us to put sable onto tops because we said there's no chance. We cannot be punished for the mismanagement of state. We recently had a case in Gauteng where on our members' permits, springbuck had to be phased out, and it's supposed to be PH, but that's how it was spelled on the actual permits, like phased off, for those that remember the movie with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. So springbuck on the Springbok vlakte had to be removed. The WRSA challenged it, we won, and now our members can farm with springbuck on the Springbok vlakte. Because they're saying springbuck apparently and Nyala and Gemsbuck didn't occur in Gauteng 500 years ago. I'd like to ask, who in this room was here 500 years ago, considering Jan van Riebeeck landed in 1652? So how can we be basing things on baselines so far back, but we talk about constant climate change and that the environment is changing? Just to give a brief background on the quota case, the WRSA has been challenging under all four ministers to try and get them to issue a hunting quota for elephant, leopard, and black rhino. We do have a settlement agreement on the current minister's desk, which we're hoping they'll sign. If not, unfortunately, we'll have to proceed with further litigation. But we do know, as soon as he does sign the settlement agreement, Humane Society and EMS Foundation are going to take it to court, so we will end up in litigation in any way to fight for those quotas. But it's ridiculous that we sit with over 40,000 elephant in the country and we can't even get permits to hunt 150 a year, which is sad. On a last note, I'd like to please welcome you all to our conference and gala dinner, which is on the 17th of October at CSIR in Pretoria. Those are some of our speakers that will be there for the conference. And then we've also got Davy Root that will be doing the main presentation at the gala dinner. So from my side, on the WRSA's point, there's no question that game is a commodity, and it's a commodity that we need to use. But we need to overcome a lot of hurdles to get certain ministers to recognize that wildlife is an agricultural commodity and doesn't fall under the protective narrative of preservation. Thank you very much.